That's confirmed open.
Okay, thank you, Clerk. And members, that's us confirmed open, and we do have a quorum, and I now call the meeting to order. I welcome all members to the 56th meeting of the Committee for Communities. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off? Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs may be taken. Can I also remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of the cameras and the sensitivity of the microphones throughout the course of the meeting. Thank you. So, agenda item 1, members' declarations of interest. Can I remind members it is your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Does any member have any interest to declare in relation to today's agenda items? Pam.
Chair, thank you. Yes, I wanted to declare an interest as a former junior minister that I would have had or may have had sight of policies from not just Executive Office but across the departments. I thought it might be useful to, if I could suggest, if that could be put down as a standing declaration of interest rather than say it every week.
Yep.
That's okay.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Kelly, go ahead.
Member of the deaf community, and we're going to be talking about housing benefit later. I'm an associate of the Chartered Institute of Housing.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. I will declare that I own a rented property, and also I'm a director of a charity. Just to indicate that, Melissa.
Chairman East Cullen Jericho, registered charity as well.
Thank you. Andy.
Yeah, trade union member of a charity and private sector landlord, Chair.
Okay, thank you everyone. And moving on then to our agenda item 2, which is apologies. I think we have a full text. Yeah. So thank you. Agenda item 3 then, members, is chairperson's business. So first I would like to welcome Pam Cameron to the committee and to wish her well in her new role. Pam and I have worked together in committee before in I think times when working together was definitely called for, and cooperation. I think that was really good. So I know the strength that Pam brings to this committee. Delighted to have you as a new member and want to wish you well. So thank you, Pam. And I know that the vast array of issues and subjects that come through this committee will be of interest to you in particular. So to falch your road.
Thank you very much.
And members, can I just check that we're content then to write to Brian Kingston to thank him for his work in committee? We did get the opportunity to do that last week as well, so thank Brian and wish him well, of course, in his new role. The other item, members, that I want to mention was that I attended a Cricket Ireland event last Friday in Malahide. It was to be the second of a series of 3 T20 matches between Ireland and England. Unfortunately, the weather on the Friday wasn't good, and rain did stop play, so we didn't get. However, I did enjoy the event. There was a great buzz about it. Good international occasion, and there are, I think, something over 45 cricket clubs here in the north, with hundreds playing the game. Really interesting story, I have to say. Part of my connection with this came from the camp that took place down at Stormont Grounds here at the Pavilion, which was an exceptional event, I have to say. I took a photograph that day of, there was maybe half a dozen hurls and half a dozen cricket bats just lying discarded on the ground, and the children obviously ran off and done something else, but I thought it was a great image. I think it's a very interesting story, I have to say, and maybe an under-told one, but would members be content to be asked Cricket Ireland to provide the committee with a written update in relation to the extent of their work and to get a better understanding of their impact? Yeah, Kelly?
Chair, that's a great idea. I would like, when Cricket Ireland come to us, to talk to us about the funding issues with cricket, because I know that their summer season means that many of the applications for funding come out, say, in April, and by the time that the applications would be handed in, well, their season's over. So it means then that unless they can apply for something that's a year ahead, it makes it quite difficult. So if we can hear about them, if there's been any movement or improvements on that for them.
Yeah, members agree to that? Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Okay, members then. Members, you will be aware that I raised the issue of the recent departmental data breach in plenary on Monday, and other members did ask questions on that day. I propose that we write to the department to provide a written response as to action being taken following this breach. and to ask what measures are being put in place to ensure that this does not happen again. If members are content with that part of it first, and then come to, Kelly?
Could we ask for a written briefing from the Information Commissioner's Office about, because the Minister had said that they had been advised that they didn't have to share the information or let the people know whose information had been breached. I don't really understand that, to be honest, and I would love to hear from the Information Commissioner's Office if that is their guidance. If somebody doesn't know that their information has been breached, but the organisation that breached it does, I thought that would have been a notifiable matter to them, but it would be good to get a written information from the ICO just to clarify that.
Yeah, I did wonder that as well. That was kind of the subject of my question to the Minister after he made a statement, and I think it is one that struck me as a bit unusual, and maybe more information, if members are content, would be helpful in that respect. Thank you. Yes, Claire?
Did Andy want in there?
No.
Sorry. No.
Okay, thank you. Members, I also want to go back to the departmental briefing received last week on the funding announced for the soccer, and the tone and the manner of some of the officials in answering the question. And I have to say, I think it's been an ongoing issue where at times relatively straightforward, predictable questions are being met with kind of surprise and having to go back. And I recall also another session where we had asked questions about the numbers of people impacted by the cross-border in terms of the winter fuel scheme. We found out the following week that was substantial. I would have expected officials to know that. So I think there's an issue there that continues to kind of hamper the flow of information, the basic information, and perfectly within the remit of this committee, and indeed things that we must be able to discover. So I just want to take members' thoughts on that. Go ahead, Kelly.
I have to say that I found it quite a difficult. The one about the football fund, quite a difficult piece with the officials. I don't understand why a statutory committee of the Northern Ireland Assembly is being told by officials that we have to request information via freedom of information. That just beggars belief that we would be denied information but get it through freedom of information. RHI recommendations have very clearly said that committee scrutiny is important, but the tone as well. It was now the guys were very defensive, and we were asking questions about issues that had been raised with us as elected members by those who were disappointed. But I found it quite difficult, and I just wonder. I know that there's been a huge turnover of staff across the whole of the civil service, but how often are the people who are coming here trained on what a committee is and what our legal responsibilities are, and general responsibilities, and how much we have access to information, and being told to use freedom of information, I don't think is appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's. I think that is a concern, and there was almost an indication that nearly things will be available and published on websites, and funders do that all the time. And a question was if the department should be treated as just another funder, which doesn't meet the measure of the challenge at all. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's really just to echo that point, echo and maybe amplify even that point that Kelly has made. Not only do I think that's a disrespectful approach to a committee. Again, I'm not blaming the officials. They haven't been told what they could tell us or let us know. But it also, that approach does little to allay concerns of those clubs who do have concerns. And like I say, a few of them I'm aware of are still considering legal action. But whenever something appears to be as covert, or it's difficult to extract information, people are bound to be more suspicious that something is wrong. So I think it's in everyone's interest to have all the information out on the table here for scrutiny, and if there's nothing wrong, that there's nothing wrong,
Yeah. Thank you. So go ahead, Kelly.
Can I just come back on that? I was a little bit concerned whenever the Minister in the Chamber seemed to be alluding that we were undermining officials by asking questions. To be honest, we are here to scrutinise ministers. We're also here to assist ministers. I have written evidence from an official that outlines what I said at committee last week, the concerns that one of the clubs has. I can provide that to the officials, to the minister. I'll have to redact the name of the person that has provided that. But it just doesn't sit well with me whenever a committee that asks questions for clarification on a matter that is causing concern, not just for those who didn't get, but across the whole footballing fraternity, because as we know at the moment, 20 are shortlisted. Goodness knows how many of those will get through. And I just think that as a committee that we're being set aside or disrespected, and the fact that we ask questions and we need the answers, but a lot of barriers seem to be getting put in place for that.
Yeah, well, listen, in sum total, would members be content then we write to the department to outline the committee's concern around the tone of that session? Members content with that? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Pat.
Not objecting to that, but just to say, to put on record that I haven't actually been able to listen back to the previous week's committee to get the full context of what happened, but no objection to that being said.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you, members. And then final piece, I think, in this item is that to advise members there will be a closed session briefing from the department on the disability and work strategy at the end of today's meeting. So just ask all members to stay on for that session, please, if possible. Thank you. Members, moving on to agenda item 4, draft minutes, which are contained in your pack there. This is the meeting of the 18th of September, and the minutes are contained at page 7. Are members content to agree the minutes of 18th of September as drafted?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you.
Sorry,
member.
Jared, just had my hand up there.
Yeah.
In the minutes, it wasn't noted that I declared an interest as being a recipient or a future recipient of an ILGOS pension, if that could be amended.
Amen.
Thank you, Sian. Yep, that's noted, Sian. Thank you. Members content then with that amendment and to agree. Thank you. Okay, members. Matters arising then, which you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 19. So can I ask if members have any comments or issues you wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings on in relation to items 5.2 to 5.5? And just to say that at 5.2 is an offer from the department to brief us again on fraud and error. Are members content to schedule a future briefing?
Yes, please.
Yep, content. So 5.2 to 5.5, members, are there any items within that members wish to highlight or draw out?
Sorry, Chair. 5.4, I appreciate that the person that has raised the issue with us about the Masters in Sign Language doesn't want to provide oral evidence. I think that in itself is concerning about the atmosphere at that. Yes, I absolutely agree that we should consider that written evidence that they have provided for us as part of that, because that has an implication for part of the sign language bill that talks about the teaching qualifications. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Any other issues within that block of matters rising, or members otherwise content with the memo? Members, at 5.6, there's a retabled draft committee response to the ERC call for evidence. Do members have any comments on that draft? Or are you content that this is forwarded to ERC?
Oh, it's very good, yes, please.
Yes. Okay, members content with that? Thank you. Okay, moving along to item 6 on our agenda, which is correspondence, the memo for which is at page 87 of your packs. So, members, can I now intend to consider the items by number in a single group and ask if you wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any of the specific items of correspondence. So we are looking at a group then that are tabled there or in your packet 6.2 to 6.6. A couple of ones I want to touch on just before I come to members, but at 6.5 there's a request from CRISP to brief on the future of the Supporting People programme. Are members content that a briefing be arranged in relation to that? Kelly?
Chair, I was going to ask actually, yes, absolutely, I think CRISP should come in, but it would be worthwhile perhaps for that briefing session if maybe we could ask for another 1 or 2 of the Supporting People providers to also come along as part of that process, because I think that the information we're getting from CRISP will be replicated across, but it's to actually see the difficulties. So I don't know, someone like Simon Community or Housing Connect or Homeless Connect, some of those sort of organisations along with Chris might be helpful, just to give that overview of the future of the Supporting People programme, because unless it is funded properly, we are in trouble with the amount of people who need that support.
Clerk, are you contented? Yeah. Members content with that proposal? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, and the members are content that the briefing is arranged. Sian, then, you had forwarded item 6.7 to be included in committee correspondence. Do you wish to say a few words on that?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think most or all members might have received the facilities report from Ulster Hockey anyway, but it was really just to highlight it and to ask for an opportunity for Ulster Hockey to come in. I have been, I suppose, quite surprised really at just, I suppose, the prevalence of hockey across the province, and when you look there at them supporting 24 men's and 44 women's clubs with 14,000 plus members across Northern Ireland. I just think it's a really vital sector of our sports community that I don't think we've had enough attention or information about really. And when they talk about their the plans that they have for the future, the lack of investment is a real hindrance there. So I think just anything that we can do really is supposed to highlight the great work that's going on. So I would be asking for them to potentially be added to our list of organisations to speak to. I think the CEO is going to be contacting the committee clerk anyway, but it's a really thorough report in terms of right across all of our council areas as well.
Yeah, members content. Go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, just say it. I thought it was very useful piece of correspondence from Ulster Hockey, and a bit disconcerting actually to read, even in conjunction with the councils, the lack of toilet facilities and stuff for women and young women. It's not good, to say the least. So it's very useful in terms, I think, us even as individual MLAs, that we can actually speak to our local councils as well, who are providing for some of these clubs. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, members then focusing on 6.2 to 6.6, are there any other items within that members wish to raise? Otherwise content with the correspondence memo as provided. Thank you, members. So then, members, you've been provided with a tabled correspondence memo, page 3. And there are some items there, 6.9 to 6.13 entabled. Members, at 6.9 is a letter from DFC Deputy Secretary Paddy Rooney advising us of his impending retirement. I have found Paddy has always been very good in making himself available to speak to members both individually and as a committee, and both formally and informally with information sessions. And I do appreciate the work that Paddy has done, and I have found him to be very reactive and responsive to concerns, and I think that's a really good approach. So would members be content we send a letter to Paddy offering thanks for his work with the committee and to wish him well in his retirement?
Yes.
Thank you, members. Okay. Thank you. So any other items then, members, in terms of 6.9 to 6.13 entabled that members wish to flag up? Go ahead, Melissa.
Clause 13, which deals with the issue of councillors' pay, by removing the power from councils to set the basic allowance and instead giving the power to the department. I know that it is an issue, and it's an issue that's very, very prevalent even in relation to councils throughout the whole of the north of Ireland, where there's inconsistencies in that in different council areas. So I would ask, would the department consider the development of a body totally independent of government, such as the IFRP, the Independent Financial Review Panel, to oversee councillors' remuneration?
Okay, I'm just not 100% clear, Melissa, which item you're referring to there.
It's clause 13 there, and item.
Is it for another agenda item?
Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill.
Yeah, no, we're getting a briefing on that next. It's the next.
We're getting a briefing on that, so maybe bring that up at that
stage.
Bring
yeah,
that up at that stage.
Yeah. When we'll have some officials in.
We actually have it here just under.
Fiscal and budget.
Officials are coming in on that one, so.
It's item 10 on our agenda later.
Right,
Sorry
okay.
if that's confused you.
Yeah, it did, because I thought that was coming on here 6.7. 6.7. It's not 6.10.
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Not to worry. So anyway, it's timely in that they're coming in. They're coming in today, so
we
you
know
can
already,
you can revisit that at that point if you're content in relation with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So are members content that the other items are action in line with the proposal set out in the correspondence memo?
Yes.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, members. Agenda item 7. This is one of an SR. It's SR 2025/149, the Housing Benefit Habitual Residence Amendment Regulations NI 2025. So there's a copy of the rule at page 363. We considered this SL1 at our meeting on the 11th of September 2025 when we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. Have members any objection to the rule? No. Therefore, can I ask formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/149, the Housing Benefit Habitual Residence Amendment Regulations NI 2025, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 8 is Department of Justice Retention and Disposal Schedule, and that's contained at page 377. Members, the Committee for Justice considered the schedule at its meeting on the 18th of September and had no objections to it. Do members have any objections to the schedule, or are you content to approve?
Content.
Content. Thank you, members. Members, then, we're moving on to a number of items now in relation to the Sign Language Bill. We need to allow time for the interpreters to set up for the live broadcasting interpreting for the next session. So I therefore propose we take a quick suspension of 1 to 2 minutes before we move to the next evidence session. Are members agreed? Okay, thank you. Yep, resume broadcasting. Thank you. Just let me know, clerk.
That's us live.
Okay, so that's us back in broadcasting, members, and we're moving on now to agenda item 9, which is the Sign Language Bill. So, members, we were due to be briefed today by the Foyle Deaf Association, but unfortunately they advised they were not able to attend. A copy of their submission is at page 457, and a copy of their presentation is at page 36 of table papers. So there's also a copy of a submission from the Deaf Women's Group NI, which is at page 477. Are members content to include a copy of each of these submissions in the final committee report? Yep, thank you. Members, at page 497 is a raised paper following a query from the committee on a review of costs associated with sign language legislation in Britain, Scotland, Wales, must have been England, Scotland, Wales, and the south of Ireland. The Assembly's raised team, from the Assembly's raised team, can I now welcome Aidan Stennett. Aidan, very welcome to the meeting to brief us in relation to the detail in the paper. So Aidan, if you want to please go ahead and brief members, and then we'll move to questions.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I previously briefed the committee on the costs associated with the Sign Language Bill back in February. You'll recall at the time I noted that the bill's explanatory and financial memorandum contained limited financial information. It noted that the bill is an enabling bill and stated that it would have no immediate financial implications, but the costs could be incurred in the future when the department implements the powers that it provides. During that presentation, members had questions about the cost of sign language provision in other jurisdictions, and that is what the briefing today has explored, with a focus on Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland. It's perhaps best if I begin with some caveats. It's difficult, if not impossible, to compare the cost of provision across jurisdictions, and there are two reasons for this. First, sign language provision in each jurisdiction is different. That's explained in greater detail in the raised bill paper that the committee received back in February. Secondly, the Northern Ireland Sign Language Bill is, as I've said, an enabling bill. We do not know, for example, which public bodies which will be designated as prescribed organisations, nor do we know the contents of the guidance those organisations will be required to follow. So we really aren't clear on what we're comparing to in this case. So within that context, direct comparison between jurisdictions should be treated with caution. Instead, what this briefing has tried to do is identify categories of costs which have occurred in other jurisdictions. So looking first at the UK example, the British Sign Language Act was introduced to recognise British Sign Language as a language of England, Wales and Scotland. It also replaced a requirement on the Secretary of State to report on the promotion and facilitation of BSL by ministerial government departments and to issue guidance on the use of BSL. At the time of its introduction, the UK government stated that the Act would impose no new costs. Although the bill did require government bodies to report, this was not viewed as being additional to the requirements that had been previously set out under the Equality Act 2010 and the Public Sector Equality Act. Since the Act was enacted, the UK government has issued 3 reports on how government departments have used BSL. The latest was published in July, and this report, like the 2 that preceded it, they did not include any detailed financial information. What they do reveal, and what might be interesting to the committee, is that not all departments have produced sign language communications, and this was largely a result of department functions, with those with limited customer-facing roles less likely to produce BSL materials. Turning to Scotland, the Scottish BSL Act 2015 required listed bodies to develop plans and raise awareness of BSL. Cost estimates at the time of the bill's passing anticipated that the Act's provisions would result in a yearly cost of £755,000. The largest proportion of that cost, £530,000, was attributable to the development of and reporting of BSL plans by listed authorities. The Northern Ireland Bill does not include a direct provision for prescribed organisations to produce plans, and is not clear whether this will be a feature of the guidance to be drawn up by the Department for Communities in the future. The bill does include provisions for the Department to report on the progress of the bill every 5 years. Other categories of costs that may carry over from the Scottish example to Northern Ireland include staffing costs at both departmental and public body level, and costs for engaging with the deaf community. The Welsh Bill was introduced in June 2025, and that's subsequent to the bill paper prepared by Race for the committee. As introduced, the bill contains provision for the Welsh Government to promote and facilitate BSL, publish a national strategy and report progress, provide guidance for public bodies, and appoint a BSL advisor and panel. Costing information produced by the Welsh Government estimated that the bill will have a total cost of between 3.8 and 4.1 million over a 10-year period. The largest proportion of this cost was attributable to funding to appoint a BSL advisor and the panel. Again, this is not a cost that is transferable to a Northern Ireland context, given the bill that's currently in front of the committee. The Welsh example does suggest that the Welsh Government anticipates some costs to be associated with the development of guidance. In the financial information, this is combined with the costs of producing a national BSL strategy, so it's not possible to disaggregate this cost. The total cost of developing strategy and guidance was estimated to be $106,000 over 10 years. And then finally, turning to the Republic of Ireland, as members will be aware, the ISL Act commenced in December 2020. A report was produced in 2021 reviewing the operation of the Act. This did not include any explicit information on the costs of meeting the Act's provisions. It did, however, note that only 20.9% of public bodies surveyed had ring-fence funding for ISL provision. In the Republic of Ireland, the Citizen Information Board provides funding to agencies with ISL responsibilities. This includes the Regulatory Centre for Irish Sign Language Interpreters. This centre provides a registration system for interpreters, and this is somewhat similar to provisions in the Northern Ireland Bill that concern a scheme for accrediting teachers and interpreters of BSL and ISL. In 2023, the Regulatory Centre for Irish Sign Language had a budget of just under €250,000. A review of questions and answers in the Oireachtas revealed other categories of costs that may be applicable in a Northern Ireland context, depending on the content of the final guidelines produced. These include things like providing interpretation of ISL at department events, funding a home tuition scheme, training staff in ISL, and providing ISL in court services and Garda Síochána. Similar to the GB example earlier, the review of questions and answers also revealed that some government departments in the Republic of Ireland reported limited ISL provision due to their role requiring limited public interaction. So thank you, Chair. That's all I wanted to cover. I hope it's useful to the committee, and I'm of course happy to take any questions.
It is actually useful just to set that overall context and sort of get a handle on what some figures might look like. And I have to say, in some degrees, while they're substantial figures, we are going to clearly need to invest more into this area as a result of this bill, and that's what the bill will create, and I think that's welcome. I suppose really the one thing that occurred to me before I come to members was around, I think it was that many departments didn't do anything, or some bodies didn't do anything because they felt they weren't customer facing. In relation to how that affects this bill, I suppose, is the fact that we have the criteria within it that where it's reasonable and practicable for departments, that they kind of almost self regulate that. So it's not a question as such, it's more a comment that would concern me, but I just want to, I suppose, compare and contrast as we go through that and as to how that might impact the implementation of the bill, and to ensure that there is, for example, my concern, I suppose, would be, frankly, people saying, well, we're not customer facing, so we're just going to turn our face against it, and that could lead to problems down the line, or people not getting that improvement that they would hope to see. But it's not a question, Aidan, but just something that your briefing has sparked of interest to me that I'll pick up later as we go through. Kelly?
Thank you very much, Aidan. Aidan, there's so while the financial outcome of the current bill that we have in front of us, we don't really have those figures at the moment, but what I'm concerned about is there's part of this bill that says about the duty of prescribed organisations and organisations to take reasonable steps, and in 3(2)(b) it talks about there's nothing in this section implies that prescribed organisations are prevented from taking into account matters of affordability to them. My concern is that we've seen from the other areas that not everywhere is putting sign language into, or interpretation into place. In having something like that within the bill, does that not already given out to those prescribed organisations that if they could say it's too expensive to provide this?
I think we'll get into a bit of legal interpretation on that one. I don't think I can answer that. It may be a good question to direct to the department.
You don't think that matters of affordability was included in any of the other? You didn't find that in any of the other regions?
I didn't come across it. That doesn't mean it's not there. I wasn't specifically looking for that. I was looking at.
And the fact that this is an enabling bill, we could go completely daft here and throw a load of stuff into this bill that could cost a clean fortune. You know, I would be quite happy if there was a deaf primary school and a deaf secondary school in every sort of council area in Northern Ireland, which would cost a lot of money. So I'm just thinking, from our point of view, when we're taking forward, if we're taking forward any amendments to this bill, there will be financial implications. I'm just wondering how far we sort of can push this to make sure it's inclusive, to meet the needs of people who require sign language, whether it's British or Irish Sign Language, and this matter of affordability, because we want it to be good provision as opposed to just providing it. So I'm just wondering, was there anything that came out from from your research into the papers about other governments and how they have had to consider that balance?
No, okay. I didn't. I think the interesting, I think an interesting point in the Republic of Ireland example was that not all. I'm just going to check for the wording here. So not all departments had ring-fenced budgets, but also there was. Apologies, I'm just scanning the document. So 31% of bodies were unaware of the ISL Act, and 36% that they were only 36% stated that they were fully compliant. So I think there's an awareness question for the people that are going, or the organisations that are going to be subject to this, but also there's a budgetary question. I think it's in the context of a wider budget situation that's quite tight.
I think my concern is that we do have the Disability Discrimination Act here, and for instance, an organisation wouldn't be able to get away with not putting in, say, for instance, ramps or different things, but the affordability measure means that they could get away with not providing interpretation for sign language. Was there anything with the amount of, say in the South, the figures that weren't aware, there doesn't seem to be anything in the paper there that says what the repercussions were for those?
No, and I'm trying to think back to the paper that came from. I don't think it went into very much detail. It was a survey, but if it's, I'm very happy to look at it again.
It'd be interesting to see, because one of the things that I am concerned about is if in the bill the Department for Communities says that it doesn't have the ability to sort of force anything on any other prescribed organisations, and then the affordability matter comes in. To me, if I was in any other department and had a tight budget, I was just going to leave that. We can't afford that. But there has to be something that sort of shows the deaf community that they are as recognised as any other part of society and will be provided for. Be interesting to see what that might be, what the repercussions are for other governments if departments do not deliver. That would be good. No, thank you very much, Aidan. It's a really good paper and really useful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the paper actually becomes more and more useful as we go on, and it's very, very useful in that sense. And I suppose one of the things that occurs to me is, can we learn anything from Wales in relation to, so we know we're dealing with 2 sign languages here, but in Wales they're dealing with 2 core spoken languages. Is there additional cost to that, and can we ensure that those are seen as reasonable, given there are 2 clearly defined forms of sign language? Is there, and I get it that Wales are at the early stages themselves. So what's your thoughts on that, Aidan?
Chair, I'm really not sure about the sort of the policy side of that. It's not really my area of expertise. Yeah. I'm sure it's something that we as a service could look at for you.
Yeah. Well, I think for now, do we see? But I think what this will do is it kind of almost provides a bit of a template that you could almost estimate some costs, or kind of get an idea of what cost might mean. Morris.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks very much, Aidan, for the paper. It's very informative. I have a couple of off-the-cuff questions, and it would be, what provision is there in the Republic of Ireland for BSL? Could you perhaps delve into that and what the costs are? Also, what the costs are for us here to develop 2 sign languages whenever the common one in use across these islands is a BSL. Kelly had a very, very valuable point there. Will people use the cost of providing something as a reason not to provide something? So if we had all the figures here in front of us, to me, a standard language across all the islands would be the way forward. So I'm just wondering, if we're making provision here in Northern Ireland for the Irish Sign Language, what provisions are being made in the Republic of Ireland for BSL?
Sure, again, we're sort of straying into stuff that is beyond the scope of the paper. The purpose of the Irish Sign Language Act was to promote Irish Sign Language. With regards to the cost of promoting two sign languages in Northern Ireland, the information that is available on the bill is limited. There is no cost in information, so I can't comment on that at this stage.
But it will be something we need to consider down the line, the cost of providing things for this assembly. This is a great place for giving money. It's not ours away to anything. So there needs to be a bit of housekeeping taking place here, not just from what I'm talking about here, but right across the Assembly. I mean, if you were in the Assembly chamber for 4 weeks, you would think that this place here is coming down with money. The speed we give it away. We don't have it to give away, unfortunately.
Okay, well, I suppose...
Thanks, Aidan.
Yep, thanks, Morris.
Right, Chair, was we
Yeah. No worries. I think for me, one of the very key acknowledged strengths of the bill is the approach to include both sign language, because if people are vulnerable because of additional communication needs, the fact that they're in a minority within a minority makes them more vulnerable of anything. So I think that's to be welcomed. I think that's something that, and as far as the cost argument goes, and it's valid and it's absolutely one that we must always take into account, but the discrimination that people potentially face and the benefit of opening up services in a fair and an equitable way, if it has a cost, then and it will have a cost, that's I think something that is absolutely valid that we will be looking at. But we'll have much more obviously on the bill as we go through. But I think if there's any other questions, go ahead, Pam.
Just a quick one. Thank you. I need to read over again, and it's useful to have this information. I'm really getting up to speed as a new member on this committee and on this bill. But is there any reference in your paper to the cost of building capacity in order to deliver sign language? Is that, because clearly that is going to be, we know how pressured those services are, and we know that there's very heavy burnout of interpreters and a lot of reliance on the same people. So clearly there's a huge need to educate and to bring up so that we actually have the capability of delivering proper and rightly so sign language in both languages to ensure that people are not left out in the cold as they currently are. And I think it's something that I'm very passionate about, the fact that there's an entire deaf community who have been ignored and sidelined and left with no access to basic information, and that's just not right. So I welcome where we are with this bill, and really looking forward to seeing more progress on it. But is there anything in your paper directly relating to the possible costs of building capacity?
Yeah, there's limited information on that. There are a couple of examples that came out from those questions and answers in the Oireachtas. So the Department for Education introduced an ISL home tuition scheme, which had a budget of €300,000 per year, and then there was so there was an example of the Irish Passport Service employing 2 members of staff who provide ISL interpretation and then training 4 additional members of staff. But unfortunately, there was no figures attached to that. So there are small examples, but it's limited. I think overall there is quite limited information about the spend and what is going on.
Yep. Sorry, just check, Pam, you?
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
It was just to follow up on Pam's point there. The explanatory and financial memorandum, as introduced, doesn't include any figures for the thoughts of the department moving forward on those sort of costs. I'm just wondering if we could go back and ask the department if they have any of those figures, because
they might have been working.
They might have been working on those, just from our point of view, because it'd be useful to see their thinking on the costs of the bill. Now, the repercussions of the bill further down the line will be a different matter, because if you're providing interpretation or sign language in other parts of government, front-facing staff, it'll escalate as time goes on. But at the moment, there's nothing within the financial memorandum that provides any costs for us. Yeah, we can do any comparison.
Members content we ask the department if there's any update on costs? Be useful to know. All right, and there may be. Members content with that?
Yeah.
Any other questions for Aidan then?
Oh, that's really good.
No, Aidan, thank you very much, and appreciate members. Clearly, we've all strayed outside of the remit of your brief, but out of curiosity, no reflection on your work at all. I think your work has just prompted some for the question, which is good. So thank you for that, and I think it'll be a very useful resource to refer back to as we go through the remaining stages. So thanks for that, Aidan. Okay. Okay, members. So we now do need to take just to check before I go then any follow-up actions in relation to that. So Kelly has identified and we've agreed one there. I did want to say at page 512 there's a copy of the Belfast Statement on Mental Health and Deafness, and Kelly, I believe you'd asked for that to be included in papers this week. Just checking, do you want to say anything in relation to that?
Just very quickly, I've been talking to Brian Symington, amazing gentleman, and John Carberry. They have been leaders on campaigning for sign language for some years, and this was something that was agreed way back in 2014, and this is part of why this is so important, why the sign language bill is so important, and why we need to ensure that, see this provision of affordability, that we take that into consideration, because if we don't enable translation and interpretation to be provided for something like mental health, then we're leaving people out, and we can't do that. So it's a difficult one for me, that that part that's currently in the bill about matters of affordability would take precedence over the needs of deaf people. Yeah. So, but Brian and John are amazing men. I would recommend to anybody to have a conversation with them. Yeah. Good.
And I have also, and I agree, they are exceptional activists and experts in all of that field. So that certainly is. I would agree with you there. Okay. So anything else then, members, in relation to that before we take another short break then to allow the interpreters to finish up their interpretation? Bring that off screen, and then we'll come back into session. So go ahead, Kelly.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee.
Moving then to agenda item 10, which is departmental briefing on the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill, clauses 12 and 13. So members have been provided with a copy of the departmental briefing paper at page 515. You have also been provided with correspondence from the Committee for Finance starting at page 522, which includes a research paper on the bill. So I'd now like to welcome the following officials to our meeting. So we're being joined this morning by Heloise Brown, and Heloise is Acting Director of the Social Housing Policy and Oversight. Sorcha Hassay, Acting Deputy Director for Social Housing Policy and Oversight, and Martina Campbell. And Martina is Head of Local Government Finance Team. So, to Fáilte Róga, all very welcome to committee this morning, and thank you for attending. And could I go, I think it's yourself, Heloise, is it, to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll come to questions from members. Thank you.
Certainly, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to brief you today on the Department's contribution to the Department of Finance's Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill. So a written briefing on clauses 12 and 13 was provided to the committee on the 19th of September, so I will give you an update on the provisions in relation to social housing tenancy fraud, which is in under clause 12, and Martina will speak to clause 13. So the proposals in clause 12 stem from recommendations from reports on tenancy fraud in social housing by the Public Accounts Committee in 2014 and the Northern Ireland Audit Office in 2013. And both those reports recommended establishing a single tenancy fraud team to provide investigative services to both the housing executive and the housing association sector. This would enable economies of scale and more effective investigations compared to the requirement for each landlord to operate its own investigations. Following the issue of the two reports, a team was established within the housing executive to carry out tenancy fraud investigations for its own tenants. And over the years, that team has built up considerable expertise in the investigation of tenancy fraud. However, it has only focused on housing executive properties. Under managing public money in Northern Ireland, the housing executive has been unable to use its own resources to undertake investigations on behalf of registered housing associations. So the department considered whether housing associations may be charged for this service by the housing executive, and we were unable to identify a legislative provision already in existence that would enable the housing executive to recover the costs of such a service. So the need for a legislative provision was identified. And in addition, the PAC report also mentioned strengthening legislation in relation to data sharing. So this clause is a step in addressing this, allowing an exchange of information between the housing executive and the housing associations for the purpose of investigating a suspected case of tenancy fraud. And the department is considering further legislation to strengthen the data sharing protocols further. So I'll just very briefly run through the sub-clauses in Clause 12. Members have a summary of what each sub-clause does, but I would just ask you to note in particular sub-clause 2, which sets out the various types of tenancy fraud which the housing executive will be able to investigate on housing associations' behalf. So they are where an application for a tenancy or a claim for succession to a tenancy may be false in a material respect, where a tenant may have ceased to occupy the accommodation as their only or principal home, or sublet or parted with possession of the accommodation, and where an application for right to buy discount may be false in a material respect. And as you'll know, housing associations no longer operate the sales scheme, but there is provision in legislation for them to operate voluntary schemes. So the provision is here in case a voluntary scheme should come into practice in the future. And then just briefly in respect of the data sharing powers is subclause 5, which is the clause that permits a housing association to disclose relevant information to the housing executive for the purpose of carrying out an investigation. And in subclause 1 for the housing executive to report to the housing association as to whether tenancy fraud has occurred and whether any offence has been committed in connection with that. Subclause 6 provides for the report to include any information regarding the investigation that the housing executive considers appropriate. And then together subclauses 7 and 8 provide that a disclosure won't breach the data protection legislation where the powers in subclauses 5 and 6 are taken into account. So there's provision there, although there is also recognition that a breach can't take place of the data protection legislation. So effectively this enables the sharing of relevant data from a housing association to the housing executive, and for the housing executive to report back to the housing association with any appropriate information on the results of its investigation. And it's then for the housing association to determine its next steps based on that information. And in preparing this clause, the department undertook a targeted consultation with housing associations and other housing stakeholders, including housing rights, who were supportive of the proposals generally. The results from the consultation are being considered to inform a wider review within the department of how to tackle tenancy fraud in social housing. And this review will include whether additional powers are required through, for example, a housing bill. And we just to sum up, we'd emphasise this work is about ensuring that social homes go to those with the rightful entitlement to them, based on the assessment of objective housing need. The focus is on ensuring the system isn't manipulated and the homes are not misused for private gain. Ultimately, the purpose of tackling tenancy fraud is to help address housing need and ensure that best value for money is achieved from the executive's significant capital investment in social housing. So that concludes just my opening remarks on Clause 12. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. A couple of quick ones from me. What is the current level of tenancy fraud in housing associations, do you think, and is that higher than in housing executive properties?
It's a little bit lower because of a lower number of properties altogether. So the housing executive is 83,000 and housing associations in and around 40,000. So the last full year that we have for 24-25, there were 272 confirmed cases of fraud reported for the housing executive, and for the housing associations it was 103.
And does that represent a difference in percentage terms, levelling out the difference of the level of absolute properties that each has in terms of percentage terms? Is it higher or lower within either one?
Part of the variability, and this is where we might often sort of say consistency, is there's 19 housing associations, so they will each have their own procedures in place. So the regulator ensures they have tenancy fraud strategies in place, but they have different levels of resources because there are very different scales. So there will be, so we could look exactly at what the percentage is, but it would still not give a very clear picture for the housing associations. Some of them are quite large and also have economies of scale, so their percentages might be better. Some of them be very small and feel that they're community organisations and they know their tenants. The percentages would be different again. So we could look at that information if that would be useful, certainly for the committee, but I've just put a few caveats around it.
Yeah, well, and I get the caveats now, and even just understanding those is helpful. I suppose, just in general terms, are you confident that this measure will increase the number of properties being recovered in housing associations and being made available?
Yes, certainly. It's certainly there was a sense that in order for people to see that landlords are serious about tackling tenancy fraud, it is about taking the investigation to the furthest level it can go to make sure that actually there's a clear message out there that it's not acceptable, and also then that properties which are more complex can be recovered. And I would say within this as well, there were the full numbers of fraud reports that come in. There will always be cases within those where it's shown that somebody is rightfully occupying the property, and it's their right to be there and it's their home, and those cases will always be found. It will just depend on the circumstances. So there might be more recoveries if there's a more consistent approach to investigation, and certainly the Housing Executive team has built up a lot of expertise in that area. So we would certainly expect more recoveries, but I would say that with a caveat that some of the non-recoveries are because people are rightfully in their home. It's not fraud.
Okay, and that actually takes me on to the other point I was wondering about as you went through the presentation. So again, taking it that succession fraud is important. There does, however, seem to be a lot of cases out there of genuine succession rights being denied. Is there any thoughts as to how we ensure that while you're dealing with the fraud, that also that where genuine cases are being mitigated against, that there are changes, anything in planning for that?
There's, as you say, there's a lot of interest in it. I think that the way to address that is through looking at the succession policy, particularly because the landlords, when we speak to landlords, they are applying the policy. And what can sometimes happen is that, if there's provision for one succession, it depends on the person in the property being aware that one succession has taken place. So perhaps some of this is about better communication with everyone who's occupying the property. There might be, different ways of addressing that.
It does seem to be an area that needs some attention, so I appreciate that. And finally from me then is in relation to, you touched upon the fact that there is a review taking place and the scope of the review. You had mentioned one of the issues looking at what additional powers. Can you give me any other sense of what the scope and remit of that review will be, and when will it be completed? When can we expect as a committee to see feedback on that review?
We would hope that there'll be consultation within months by the end of the calendar year. We'd certainly hope that will go to that timescale. There is learning from the PAC recommendations and NAIO recommendations around making the process more consistent and being more consistent when we talk about fraud, when we talk about recovery or abandonment, that those terms are being used consistently by the different landlords. So there's a bit of work there that is non-legislative, isn't about just how we sort of monitor that practice. But in England, for about 10 years, they have had provisions around legislation against subletting in particular, which did make it a criminal offence. And making something a criminal offence brings you into different levels of protection in terms of the data that can be shared and investigative powers. So for questions around, for example, around sharing information with utility companies, that becomes much more straightforward when something has been made a criminal offence. So that's one of the things we would expect to look at in the consultation that's coming soon, is whether making it an offence will enable better detection and more recovery than we can under the current system.
Thank you, Heloise. Kelly?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the work on this, and I appreciate your time's tight to get response back to the finance on this one. But I'm just wondering, so the Housing Executive will be able to investigate tenancy fraud for housing associations, and they'll be enabled to charge a fee. Are there any thoughts on how that fee process would work, or costs or anything like that at this stage?
It's still very early stage because, as you can imagine, that was the one area where the housing associations had a lot of questions. The Housing Executive can estimate what their costs would be, so in order to achieve full cost recovery, what they would need to raise from those from the social housing associations. We're still in discussion with them. I would say we're looking at different options about whether, how the charge is scaled, as you say, for a very small association compared to the larger ones. It's a small amount when it's shared between a larger number of organisations. So if it is proportionate, it's looking at a very, very small proportion of, say, the annual rental cost of a property.
Yeah,
it would be very
And
small.
if I'm just thinking sort of on down the line a bit, if there is tenancy fraud found in, say, for instance, a housing association property, how does that tie back to reporting if housing benefit is involved, and I take it then it would be for the housing association to make right in whatever legal process. So there will be costs involved there, and there will obviously be costs involved with involving housing benefit teams. Has that been sort of worked out yet?
To some extent, on the housing benefit side, there is good communication in terms of fraudulent activity in terms of tenancy fraud and with housing benefit. So there is those lines of communication are there. Obviously, because the housing executive is operating at the housing benefit payments. For the housing association, when that information goes back to them from the housing executive to say what their investigation has found, it will then be for the association to decide what to do. So it may be that they simply recover the property. It may be that they feel that they've got the evidence there with the support of the housing executive to bring a prosecution. And we've left that in terms of allowing that at this point, because if there is later legislation for a criminal offence, that means that the housing executive can consider those whole costs. But it would be for the housing association to determine whether it has the resources and the willingness to bring a prosecution forward if there was legislation. At the moment, any prosecution would be under the Fraud Act because there isn't a specific tenancy fraud offence.
And I'm just thinking, I'm imagining that the housing executive isn't going to be going into every housing association and testing all of their properties and tenancies. So I'm sort of thinking that if a housing association is bringing this forward to the housing executive, they know rightly they've done their own pre-investigations to that. But what legal ability will the housing executive have to direct either the housing association or to remove the tenant from the property if there is fraud?
Okay, so it would always be for the landlord to remove the tenant, so it would always be for the housing association. The housing executive can have its own data sharing protocols in place with other companies, for example. So it may be able to get more effective data sharing as a public sector organisation than a housing association would. So what we would envisage happening is a housing association would still do its preliminary investigations if it's about looking at whether somebody's going in and out of the property and who that is. At the point when it becomes that they feel that they don't have the powers or the expertise to do that in a way that could ultimately support a prosecution if a prosecution was to take place, that would be the point they would decide to ask the housing executive to step in. And then the housing executive will bring they have a team quite often with sort of very specialist background, so they will be able to bring a standard that if it came to court would be more likely to stand up in court.
And then just finally on that then, so if a person is found guilty of a tenancy fraud, I don't see there what the potential penalties could be. Is there any thoughts on that?
So at the moment, because it's under the Fraud Act, there haven't been prosecutions because it is difficult to prove. If you look at the legislation that's operative in England, it's a fine basically for unlawful subletting, and there can be unlawful profit orders as well. The legislation provides for that. So if there's evidence that somebody has profited from subletting a property, that can be recovered by the landlord. So that there's that, and there's a fine in terms of if the criminal offence is established.
So the landlord has to recover that cost. Yes. So it'll be for the house, although the housing executive could have found the person guilty, it will be for the landlord to recoup the costs or recoup that loss.
Yes, in effect, because it would be their property, it's their asset that has been misused.
Thank you very much.
But again, the housing executive is still doing it on a cost recovery basis.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just before I come to Melissa on this section, just to point out we are going to hear about clause 13 and then we'll take some more questions. So just bear that in mind in terms of timing. But anyway, we're okay. Melissa?
Yeah, Father Rove and Sean you. You're all very welcome. Just sitting reading the presentation to date, I had a sense that the greater responsibility is with the housing executive, and that the housing associations maybe have a duty, we say, to provide information, nearly as if they have come on incidentally. But to what extent are they actually expected to be proactive in identifying housing tenancy fraud?
I mean, they certainly are expected to. They will all have tenancy fraud strategies in place, and the regulator, as part of the department, will check that in the annual check that it does in terms of the procedures that the housing association is required to have in place. I think where we would see a benefit is in more consistency, so that the thresholds for when the associations feel they need to push on a particular area are more consistent, and then when they refer a case to the housing executive, once they can do that, are more consistent. And I think we could drive a bit more consistency with these kind of measures in place.
Thanks, Melissa. Mark, you have a hand on screen there. Go ahead, please. Along all right.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I'm glad to see that steps are being proposed and being taken that they actually, I suppose, improve and make more consistent the approach to tackling tenancy fraud. In terms of, I think you'd said, sorry, what was it? There were 400 cases, maybe about 400 in total. Was it 270 housing executive and 130 housing association? I don't know. Have you a breakdown of like what percentage of them were succession fraud, and what other fraud types were in that mix? I also see there, and further down in our documents, page 553, that last financial year, the housing executive had 752 new cases of suspected tenancy fraud. It would be good just to get a breakdown of those fraud. How many of those are succession? How many of those are the likes of subletting? And how many are others? And what others there are? I think this is really maybe just the tip of the iceberg, really. And I have to say, in terms of succession fraud, the level of standard of investigation seems very high. It's prolonged sort of procedure, and a lot of resource is put into it. It's like The Wire or something, the depth that people go into these investigations. But a problem with that, and I think that the chair alluded to it, is that often innocent people making a succession claim, they're all treated with equal suspicion. Another issue, I suppose, would be this should remove inconsistencies, but there are huge consistencies in how the associations and the housing executives tackle fraud, where you have people not necessarily subletting their property, but not occupying it either. People are allocated a house. We have a waiting list approaching 50,000 people or families. But they don't take up occupancy. They just want a separate address for whatever reason. You've others who will just occupy it maybe every now and again if they're having a party. And the level of investigation in it is in stark contrast to the standard of investigation and the succession fraud, where maybe an association, or I think even the housing executive, will just write out a letter to the tenant. And if they get a reply, they say, "Oh, that's confirmation that they're living there," when other people living in the street will never, or sorry, rarely see anyone going in and out of that property.
I'm just going to check, Kerry, might have a wee supplementary to that, so I'll ask for No, it's separate.
No.
Okay, we'll go ahead then with.
Okay, thank you. We can certainly get you a breakdown of the tenancy fraud types for the housing executive. I'm not sure that we would have a classification quite in terms of abandonment and succession and those exact classifications, but we can certainly provide a bit more information about the breakdown. The focus on succession, I think, is partly an element of the fact that the person trying to succeed to the tenancy isn't already an applicant. Sometimes they may be on the waiting list, they may be homeless, but they could also be somebody who the housing executive has no knowledge of, and therefore they have to follow the due process and make sure that there is entitlement there, because if it's a statutory succession, that person can have a right to it, but they have to therefore check. And the same with policy succession. A non-occupation can be one of those areas where a property may be perceived to be empty. Sometimes if somebody is working and they're working abroad or they're in hospital for a period of time, a property can rightfully be empty. And those circumstances may not be known to people who are reporting, and that is why, again, it's really important that across the social sector we have a consistent approach to looking into those and reporting on them. So that's the drive for the review that's coming up, is to make that process more consistent. We can certainly get you the information that we have on the breakdown of the different types of fraud as they're currently recorded, but I suspect it may be more around whether the property's been abandoned, whether it has had to be recovered, and the level it's had to go to recover it. Maybe that kind of information rather than the cause. But hopefully that will be helpful to you.
Thank you. And Kelly had touched on a point there around penalties, and if I'm thinking in the likes of one of those non-occupation cases, if we put it like that, what the penalty might be, because that's property will be recovered from this person. They'll have been awarded this property in the first place by virtue of being top of the list. And now they'll have homelessness points again because this will have been recovered, so they will be awarded another new property.
If a property's recovered because they're not the rightful tenant, they could still be on the list. But you would still, I think, in terms of that person's individual rights, you would still come up against whether something's been proven against them. And again, this comes back to whether it goes to court and whether we can say actually there has been misuse of the asset of a home in that case. But certainly if somebody isn't the rightful tenant, they could be on the waiting list, they could be homeless, they could have points and be waiting to access a property, while they're also maybe unlawfully accessing.
Sorry, I have a quick cross wires in. I mean, the actual tenant, although they might not reside in the property, the person who has been allocated this home but hasn't or doesn't make use of it, but it's not necessarily for financial gain, but it's far from victimless whenever we do have tens of thousands of other people desperate for homes.
Yeah, certainly. And again, that's where that stronger process and that consistency and being able to follow through and establish the facts along the lines of a criminal investigation, even if it doesn't proceed to taking somebody to court, will be helpful, because that will then inform decisions that the housing executive can make around eligibility for social housing, and whether that person could rightfully access a tenancy or whether they've been involved in behaviour that would make them unsuitable to be a tenant. So there are actions there, but again, this is a sort of first step in us getting the house in order to really sort of bring a new and more thorough approach to this.
Okay, thank you. And just if I could pick up slightly, and I have to say, Heloise, I think there's been some real good engagement and answers, but I do want to point out, just in the spirit of an earlier discussion that we had around that issue, that question marks around the categories. I would have thought that a fairly basic one, and one that officials would have thought of in advance it might be. So I'd be very keen to hear that information back. I think that's a really important around the categories. So just to point that out. And Kelly, please.
Just very quickly, I know that there's a review ongoing of tenancy fraud procedures, and that becomes very important when we think that the housing executive is going to be marking its own homework on this. What sort of processes are being considered then to test how the housing executive is looking at its tenancy fraud? Because to me, it does feel like quite an expensive process for landlords if they have to evict and have to go to court and things like that. So I'm just wondering, in that review of tenancy fraud, when are we expecting that, and does that deal with the housing executive marking its own homework?
I mean, they will learn, because they're members of the UK-wide Tenancy Fraud Forum, and they'll be involved in local tenancy fraud forums. They are learning from and feeding into some of those national level discussions, actually, and things like the methodology in terms of calculating the cost of tenancy fraud has been quite valuable information coming from the housing executive. So that they're operating at a very strong level. I think that, they have a good reputation at UK level with those tenancy fraud forums. So I would expect to see that they can sort of contribute quite well in terms of helping the housing associations and providing support to develop their processes. We are looking at things like sort of making more standard data protection impact assessments and sharing of information, those kind of things. And it's led by the housing executive because it has that economy of scale. I have a little bit of a concern being led by the housing executive when they are the biggest landlord in Northern Ireland. So when they're checking their tenancies for tenancy fraud, they're checking their own tenants. I know there's supposed to be a brick wall between the two sides of the housing executive, but is there an oversight going to be put in to make sure that the housing executive is being as rigorous with themselves as they are with housing associations? We can look at that. I mean, it is essentially a landlord function, so it's on the landlord side of the organisation, but it would certainly appear in things like their quarterly, their quarterly and annual reporting and their business plans. They would certainly report on that. So it's open to scrutiny, and it's open to more scrutiny because it's a public sector organisation as a whole. But it would certainly be one of the things that we would be keen to focus on, obviously, as part of our oversight. Thank you.
Very valid point. Morris.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be brief. It's just to ask that as Kelly's already alluded to it, she must be reading my notes here, about the length of time it takes the housing executive to deal with tenancy fraud, whereby a property may be empty and the tenant may have another partner in another council area and is living out of the area. And there's all sorts of reasons that a house can become vacant. But the length of time and the hoops that the housing executive have to get through to prove that the tenant is not actually living there, will that be addressed as part of the review that will streamline the process? Because it's the process that makes it difficult. It's not actually the people that are not living there, they're easily identified, but it's the process of going through to get that property back into the housing executive.
We would expect that, certainly, we would expect that. And if the proposals for a bill that does make a public statement about taking tenancy fraud more seriously, that will open doors for, I think, better information sharing with utility companies, with telephone companies, with the other information that would standardise it and make it a bit quicker and easier maybe to get the information that they need. So it's seeing that there's support behind it and seeing that there's the weight of legislation behind it would help.
Be important. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Morris. So back to yourselves, Heloise. Maybe we're going moving on to clause 13. Brief.
Me?
Yeah, quick brief, and then we'll get some questions. Thank you very much.
Hopefully mine's a bit more straightforward than Heloise's. So one of the recommendations of the recently published review of the role and responsibilities of councillors in Northern Ireland was that responsibility for setting the amount of the basic allowance paid to councillors should be removed from councils and passed instead to DFC. So at the moment, the power as it stands allows DFC to set the maximum level for the basic allowance, and councils then decide the amount of the basic allowance to pay up to that limit. This results in councillors being paid different allowances depending on the council they serve. So this amendment will remove that flexibility for councils to pay less than the maximum, and it is implementing one of the recommendations of the independent review, and will ensure fairness for councillors, that they're all paid the same rate for doing the same job, irrespective of which council they serve. So the Minister, with executive agreement, accepted that this was a reasonable recommendation and agreed to implement as soon as possible, and the Financial Provisions Bill was identified as a suitable legislative vehicle because it is, strictly speaking, a technical amendment. It's not a new power. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Martina. So I know we're coming first of all to Melissa.
Yes,
Lanneray.
Martina, I've always been of the impression, well, I've had the opinion as an ex-councillor that for those that do their job, it's never enough, and for those that don't do their job, it's always too much. But at the same time, I do think that, and I would ask maybe if the department would consider the whole idea of the development of a body totally independent of government, such as the IFRP, the Independent Financial Review Panel, that they in fact would oversee what it is that's paid to councillors, and that would be standardised throughout all of the councils here in the north of Ireland.
Yeah, that well, strictly speaking, the review was independent. It was conducted by an independent chair, and there are powers within the Finance Act to set up a remuneration panel. So certainly, in looking at implementing all of the other recommendations, that is one of the issues that we will be considering.
I think that the independent review panel, but that in fact would have the power then to actually say this is what councillors should be paid, as opposed to that actually being a decision taken, say, within the department itself.
Yeah, well, it was the Minister took the panel made a recommendation, which the Minister, in trying to strike a balance in the current economic climate, didn't feel was a fair reflection of public sector pay across the board. The panel had recommended an increase in the region of 28.8%, whilst other public sector pay was in the kind of lower range. So in striking that balance, the Minister decided that a 5% pay rise was appropriate.
But the point that I keep making, to come back to it again, is that is it possible that they might consider arriving at a situation whereby you take it out of the hands of the Minister himself for making the decision, and that it's actually a decision taken by the independent review panel?
I suppose that would be something that we could consider, but would probably require an amendment to the legislation at some point in the future. And it's certainly something that we will consider, yeah.
Thank you. Morris?
Good Chair, and Chair, I'll be brief. I have no issue at all with the councillors getting a raise whatsoever. But as Melissa has touched upon a point there, that there are some councillors that the allowance they get is not enough for the work they do. And there are others who, quite rightly, it would be far too much for what they do. So it's a part-time role. So what checks and balances are in place within local councils to ensure that the people that are elected and are paid are actually doing a job, rather than, I mean, there's no checks or balances. It's the only part-time role I know where there's no criteria of how you do your job, or there's no...
I mean, I think that would be something for... it certainly wouldn't be something that I don't think that the department can intervene in. It would be obviously for the electorate to decide if the councillor is fulfilling the role that they elected him or her to. I mean, I don't think there's anything that we could do. It's certainly during the review. The review found, I think, that almost 80% of councillors had either a full-time job or a part-time job, which confirmed, I guess, that the role is a part-time role. But I suppose I would have to come back to you on whether or not there are any other checks and balances. But nothing is coming to mind other than, you know, the parties, the whip's role, the party leader's role, and constituents.
And the people who aren't in parties. We'll leave it there.
Oh yes, okay.
I could go further than that, Morris.
I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Morris. Shan, you've indicated there. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I mean, I welcome any opportunity to get a bit of consistency across council decisions on this. I think that no public representative should be involved in setting their own pay, whether that's MLAs or elected representatives. So I think the disparity between councils over the last 9 years has been evident, where some councils have obviously selected to take a pay rise, others haven't, and you've ended up then with councillors in different boroughs being paid different allowances. So would absolutely welcome that. Would also be interested in the proposition that Malaysia has put forward there in terms of taking it out of the department and actually looking akin to the remuneration board that MLAs will have. I think there's definitely merit to that, to take it out of the political realm in that sense. And just as a piece of feedback, I mean, I'm my own party's local government whip, and the piece of feedback that we've had over the last recent weeks and months has been very clear that this should not and cannot become a full-time role, because it would actually eliminate quite a few people from taking on the role, as you've just alluded to there, with 80% of people having other jobs. And that is the joy of having different levels of government and different approaches to levels of government. So, you know, we would, as a party, I think we at the executive also supported the minister's recommendations in terms of what he took on board from that independent review, you know, to look at an equitable increase for councillors in line with other public service bodies. I think was a fair decision. but like others, you know, we can't underestimate the work that goes into being a local councillor. I think quite a few of us on this committee have been in that position too. But I suppose just from our point of view, would support Malaysia's view in terms of looking at something, some proposals that would take it outside of the department and independently, and would also then support the consistent approach across all councils. But thanks so much for this piece of work. I think it is really important, and it speaks to the very heart of equity across our local government. But thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Sian, and thank you, members, for that useful discussion, I have to say. I suppose where I come from in relation to this issue, and I do agree with Melissa around the idea of an independent body, and also I think it's an important point Sian raises around people who are doing other things being able to be involved in local government and in our democratic process. And I think also I would be keen that remuneration would ensure that we get a diverse and a broad range of representation, that we get people with disabilities and support them properly in order to allow them to be councillors and part of that process and represent people with care and responsibilities, people who maybe live in rural areas where public transport. I think whatever remuneration we come up with should ensure that this, as all levels of government, should be reflective of community and society. So that's where I would sort of, I suppose, come at it from. But I think it's useful work and interesting work for the future. And I think it's great to see committee putting forward proposals, and it's great to see yourselves taking account of those and looking at how those could be worked into future work in this regard. But listen, thank you. I want to thank you.
Chair,
go ahead, Melissa. I'll give you. Go ahead.
Maybe a quick comment. When you said that you found that 80% of all councillors had some other source of income, that's because of the very fact that the council income in itself isn't adequate. It doesn't mean to say that for 1 second that they're not doing a full-time job as a councillor. Very often they are, and they have to look to some other source of income in order to complement what it is that they receive at present.
Actually, that is quite true. The survey that the independent review conducted, it had a very high response rate. I think it was something like 62% of councillors responded to the survey. So you can kind of look to the results with some degree of credibility, I guess. So yes, you're right that a lot of them did indicate they had to out of necessity. And certainly, as the chair has mentioned, the attracting people and particularly people from manual labour type jobs whose employers are not as flexible as those who maybe work in white collar type jobs. So yes, there was a lot of useful information in that survey that we're looking at as we move through implementation of the recommendations.
Yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
Just a very quick one. Any future decisions on councillors' pay has an impact on the local rate setting. So I'm just going to ask, is there a potential to clarify in guidelines or regulations that the decision would be made, say, for instance, by September to allow the councils to include that as part of their rate setting process?
Yeah, we're very much aware of that. But the problem is that in general, the yearly increase to councillors' allowance is tied to the settlement of the NJC pay scales for council staff. So it depends on when that pay settlement is.
It just makes it difficult for a council to backdate then, because having been
we hear all about
it. It makes it difficult. Yeah.
Yes, I fully appreciate that. But I think in terms of trying to input to the planning document that the finance officers will provide to council, that they can kind of look around and see what the general average public sector pay settlements are and use that as a guide. It won't be perfect, but it'll be close, unless it's a review. And I mean, we have committed to doing a review in another, I think it's 7 years, independent review. So unless there's something like that which would give you something that wouldn't be the norm, if you like.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Martina, Heloise and Sorcha. Thank you all very much, and appreciate that, and we look forward to seeing further work coming forward in this area. Thank you. Okay. Okay, members, any follow-up there? So we have the request for further information on the categories. Is there anything else that members would like to pick up on? Kelly?
Just
There was one around penalties, was there?
well, I don't think that's ready yet for those guys, but it's that tenancy fraud procedures, an update on where they are with the review on that one.
Yeah. Request an update on where they're at with the review. Yeah. Morris?
No, I'm perfect agreement there. Yeah. At least we know what we're talking about.
Okay, members, thank you. So I propose now, with members' agreement, maybe we'll take a short break before we go into our closed session. So can we now agree to go into have that break and move into close without coming back into session? Yeah. So members, we'll take a short 5-minute break and then we'll come back in to resume in closed session at agenda item 11. Thank you, members.
Live.
Thank you, Clerk. So we're back in live session there, members, and can I ask if there are any further actions that members wish to committee to take in relation to that session? Go ahead, Kelly.
Just on the back of what we've heard, could we as a committee write to the Minister for Infrastructure just to ask what contributions that they will be considering making in the next or in the multi-year budget for enabling access to employment for people with disabilities?
Yeah, members content with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, members, so if that's all, then we'll move on to agenda item 12, which is in relation to Forward Work Programme. Are members content with the Forward Work Programme as drafted there? Yeah. Can I just flag an issue, members, has come kind of over the course of the last day or two that has been raised with me. Now, I had been engaging with the department around some issues with the universal credit, are currently working on the migration from ESA. I have picked up over the last period of time a number of issues around capacity and things like that, and I just think it might be useful to get further information from the department in relation to that, maybe in the first instance in writing as to how that part of the migration is going, and then with a view to seeing if we need to maybe ask them in to clarify some issues. But it seems to have developed as a bit of a theme over the past number of days and weeks, and that, and just to check that. Would members be content that we look at that?
Yeah.
And we seek the information in the first instance?
So written update in the first instance?
In the first instance, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Chair, just further to that, certainly I've had some stuff through my own office, in particular regarding the immigration line, and I've been engaging with the department, so there might be some useful stuff that they can convey in regard to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Members content?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Otherwise content with the Forward Work Programme as per the memo in the note. Mm-hmm. Agenda item 13 then, members, any other business? Do members have any other business they wish to raise? No?
Can I just pivot back maybe to the briefing on the disability and work? Just if we can ask the department for a full overview as to all current support schemes that they've got in place for disabled people and employers, just so that we have a clear understanding of what currently the department, I think I know exactly what it is, but it's always good just to be sure.
Yeah, members content?
I was just going to say, Andy, can we add into that, because the Department of Health has the regional day opportunities, which is outside of Department for Communities, and Economy's bound to have stuff there as well. So if maybe we can ask those three, because they're bound.
The executive, they asked across all departments.
What's available for?
Yeah, members content with that. And Clerk, are you clear enough on the proposal now? That
a direct request to the Department for Communities and one to the executive for a cross-departmental report.
So community specific plus cross-departmental.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be useful.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for
The
that.
thing I'm worried about with that is, does Department of Health see the regional day opportunities as employment? You know, how do they what terminology do they use? That's the only thing. But we can ask them and see how far we get.
Yeah, let's ask the question. They can respond in whichever. I do see the point. There could be a difference of, and sometimes it may be, and sometimes it may not be. Yeah. That's the other element of that. But valid question, I think.
Whether or not day scheme placements are
regional day opportunities are considered part of this,
because regional day opportunities got
preparing somebody for work. Yeah.
Okay, members, so moving then to agenda item 14, which is date, time and location of the next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 2nd of October 2025 in room 29 here. So thank you, members. Wish you all well. Our meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.